Please adjust your YouTube's video watching quality up to 1080 pixels 60 frames per second HD or more to have the best watching experience. Thank you.
All right, ready to dive in. Today, we're tackling Saudi Arabia. You know, it's always in the news, but we're going deeper. Think ancient history, the roots of Islam, powerful rulers. And how about a kingdom trying to, totally reinvent itself for the 21st century? You with me?
I'm with you. It's a journey, that's for sure. To really get Saudi Arabia now, you got to understand its past. I mean, it's a place where you've got these echoes of, really old civilizations bumping up against a nation that's changing so fast.
Okay, so let's rewind way back. Before the kingdom even existed, what was going on in this region?
So think about it. The Arabian Peninsula, right where Saudi Arabia is, it's been this crossroads for people for, forever. I mean, we're talking prehistoric settlements, trade routes connecting empires, civilizations rising and falling, leaving their fingerprints on history.
So it wasn't just an empty desert. There's a lot more to it.
Oh, way more. Layers upon layers. And get this, one layer might surprise you. It's connected to the Roman Empire. Parts of what Saudi Arabia now were, on the edge of this huge empire. They traded. There's even some Roman buildings left that they're still finding. It shows how connected the ancient world really was.
Hold up, Roman buildings. Now you've got me picturing, Indiana Jones in the desert. But okay, let's switch gears to something huge. We got to talk about Islam, right?
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia is the birthplace.
You got it. 7th century, the Prophet Muhammad shows up in Mecca, which is in the Hijaz region. Now it's Saudi Arabia, right? But his teachings, they laid the groundwork for Islam. And Islam, man, that changed world history big time. It all started right there.
And it took off pretty fast, didn't it? Beyond Arabia.
Oh, yeah. After the Prophet Muhammad died, his followers, man, they were driven by their faith, took the message of Islam all over, North Africa, Persia, everywhere. And the crazy thing is, the dynasties that led this, the Rashidun, Umayyad, Abbasid caliphates, they all came from that same area, what would become Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so we're talking a historical and spiritual powerhouse. And Mecca, where the Prophet Muhammad was born, that became the center of the Islamic world.
Exactly. Mecca has the Kaaba, the holiest site in Islam. It became this focal point for Muslims all over. And Medina, that's where the Prophet Muhammad started the first Muslim community. Super important. Both those cities, they're in the Hijaz region of Saudi Arabia. They're called the two holy mosques. And every year, millions of Muslims go there for Hajj, the pilgrimage.
It's hard to even imagine that many people all going to one place from every part of the world. It all goes back to Saudi Arabia and Islam, so deeply connected.
And that connection, it just got stronger over time. Empires rose and fell, but that region, it stayed a spiritual center. Then in the 1700s, there's this new power on the scene, the Ottoman Empire. They had a big impact on Arabia.
Okay, things are getting interesting. So how did the Ottomans get involved?
Well, the Ottomans, they had already conquered huge chunks of Southeastern Europe, North Africa, Middle East. They were expanding, and they got to the Arabian Peninsula. So the Hijaz region, that's where Mecca and Medina are, that fell under Ottoman control. Big shift in power,
So not a unified Saudi Arabia yet, just part of a much bigger empire.
Right, and don't forget, within Arabia itself, you had all these different tribes and leaders all wanting power. The Ottomans, they had to play it smart to keep control. There was cooperation, but also a lot of conflict.
So the Ottomans, they held on for a while.
For centuries, yeah. Controlled Hijaz, protected the pilgrimage routes to Mecca and Medina. But then, 1800s, things started brewing within Arabia, this new wave of change that would eventually challenge the Ottomans.
Okay, I'm sensing another big turning point coming up. What was going on that led to Saudi Arabia as we know it?
So, over in the Najd region, this powerful leader comes up, Abdulaziz bin Abdul Rahman. People called him Ibn Saud. He came from a family, long history of leaders, and his vision was to unite all the tribes. He wanted a strong, independent Arab state.
Ibn Saud, he's the guy behind modern Saudi Arabia.
You got it. 1902, he starts this campaign to unify Arabia. He was brilliant, a military genius, totally determined, made alliances, handled tribal rivalries, and slowly took control of different regions.
So it wasn't just brute force. He'd understand the politics and social dynamics too.
Oh yeah, he was a master strategist, knew he needed the tribes to support him, and he used Islam, the principles and traditions, to legitimize his rule.
It sounds like he was playing 3D chess, moving all these pieces across Arabia to make his vision happen. And the Ottomans were declining around World War I, right? I bet that helped.
It definitely did. As the Ottomans' weakened finally collapsed, Ibn Saud saw his chance. Time to solidify his control, declare independence. Everything was lined up for the birth of a new kingdom.
Okay, so we're moving out of the Ottoman era. Enter the House of Saud and the creation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. By 1932, Ibn Saud had done it. He unified this huge, diverse Arabian Peninsula. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is officially born. He's the first king. I mean, that's huge. It's a whole new chapter in the story of this ancient land.
Wow, we just went from ancient times, birth of Islam, the Ottomans, and now Ibn Saud. That's a lot. Let's take a second to process all this history. We'll be back to keep going with this Saudi Arabia deep dive.
Yeah, good idea. Next up, we'll look at Ibn Saud's reign and how this new kingdom dealt with a world that was changing so fast.
All right, we're back, diving deeper into Saudi Arabia. Last we left off, the Arabian Peninsula was unified. New kingdom on the scene, 1932. So Ibn Saud, new king. What were his biggest challenges, you think?
Well, first off, just imagine bringing all those different regions together. They all had their own traditions, loyalties to different tribes, different ways of life, uniting them, like creating a national identity. That was a huge challenge. Ibn Saud had to figure that out, build trust, and he had to build a government that could actually hold this new country together, you know.
So it's more than just drawing lines on a map, right? He's got to weave all these pieces into a real nation. What'd he do? What were his strategies?
He went back to the basics, used Islamic principles, the traditions, emphasized what they had in common, their shared faith. But he also knew that the country needed to modernize. Like, if Saudi Arabia was going to succeed, it needed to get with the times. Education, infrastructure, healthcare, all that.
Okay, so tradition and modernization, two sides of the same coin. Sounds like a theme, right? Throughout Saudi Arabia's story. But then, 1938, everything changes. Oil.
Boom, oil. Totally changed the game. Not just for Saudi Arabia, for the whole world, really. You go from this agricultural society to suddenly they're a global powerhouse. This desert kingdom, they had the thing that would fuel modern life.
And that kind of sudden change, that's going to bring challenges, but also opportunities, right?
Yeah.
How did all that new wealth affect the kingdom?
Don't forget, this was a time when everything was changing fast. Development, modernization, globally. Ibn Saud, he took those oil revenues and poured them into the country. Infrastructure, education, social programs. He knew if this wealth was going to help people, it had to be used right.
Had to be careful with it. Managing that flood of money, modernizing, keeping things stable. And all while the world's in this Cold War mess.
So what happened after Ibn Saud died? 1953, right? His vision for Saudi Arabia, did that carry on?
His sons, they took over. First his eldest Saud, then Faisal in 64. Each of those kings, they had their own problems to deal with. Cold War, Arab nationalism growing, and oil. Oil is just getting more and more important. And Faisal, his time as king, that's when the 73 oil crisis happened, right? Mm-hmm. Saudi Arabia, they must have been in a really strong position then.
Oh, absolutely. That oil crisis, it started because the Arab oil-producing nations, they put an embargo on the West. They were backing Israel in the Yom Kippur War. The whole world economy went crazy. And Saudi Arabia, as the biggest oil producer, they were calling the shots.
So suddenly, this country that most of the world didn't even know, they're at the center of everything. How did they handle all that power?
Faisal, he used that power for the Arab world, promoted Islamic unity, and inside Saudi Arabia, he oversaw huge growth. Economically, development, invested in infrastructure, education, all the social programs. A lot of people see his time as king as a time of real progress.
But being king, there's always pressure from inside the country, outside the country, any big events that happened while he was king, any big challenges he had to deal with.
Well, the 70s, they were a wild time globally. Islamic extremism was on the rise, and in Saudi Arabia, all the social and economic changes, it caused some friction. And then 1979, you have that seizure of the Grand Mosque in Mecca. Extremists took it over. Totally shocking. It showed that even with all the progress, there were still these forces pushing back. Tradition versus modernization, it was a tough balance.
Yeah, that's a hard lesson. Even when things seem good, economically, growing influence, there's always something going on internally. And then 1975, Faisal is assassinated.
Terrible. It shocked the whole kingdom. His brother Khalid became king, then fought in 82. Those two, they kept dealing with world politics, the whole oil game, but they also kept pushing for development, modernization inside Saudi Arabia.
So we've gone from Ibn Saud, unifying the kingdom, through Saud, then Faisal. Now we're with Khalid and Faid. more growth, more change. But I'm noticing a pattern here. Tradition bumping up against modernization, keeping things stable inside the country while dealing with pressure from the outside. Seems like every king, he had to figure out how to balance all that.
It's true, it's this constant tightrope walk. And then 2005, you have King Abdullah. He was known for being cautious, reforming slowly, focused on social stuff, economic development, keeping things peaceful inside and outside Saudi Arabia.
And then 2015, King Salman. His reign, that's when we see this new generation of leaders. His son, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he's become the face of Saudi Arabia, all these big plans for the future.
You could say that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, he's a big change for Saudi Arabia. He's bold, some people say controversial. He's pushing for a lot of changes, economic and social, wants to modernize the kingdom, get away from depending on oil so much.
And that's where Vision 2030 comes in. That's the big plan we always hear about. But before we get into that, let's think about the history. We just went through decades of change, from a new kingdom trying to modernize to this global power player dealing with world-changing events.
That's exactly right. To understand Vision 2030, you have to understand the history. It comes from this desire to make sure Saudi Arabia keeps succeeding, stays important in a world that's changing so fast.
Okay, so let's talk Vision 2030. What are the goals, the big ones? How does it reflect what Saudi Arabia wants for its future? We've talked a lot already, though. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into Vision 2030 and what it could mean for Saudi Arabia and the world.
Sounds good. We'll dig into the details, see how it might change Saudi Arabia's economy, its society, its role in the world.
We're back. Time to tackle this Vision 2030. We've gone through all of Saudi Arabia's history. Ancient stuff, Islam, the kingdom, how they became such a big player on the world stage. And now it's like they're at this crossroads ready to redefine themselves again. So break it down for me. Vision 2030, what is it? What makes it so ambitious?
Well, think of it like this. It's their roadmap to the future. It's this huge plan, right? The goals, they're big. Diversify the economy, get away from relying so much on oil, and build a society, like a really vibrant one. Embrace innovation, technology, social progress. They want to change how the world sees the kingdom.
Okay, hold up. Get away from oil. Now that's interesting. We talked about how oil transformed Saudi Arabia, but it seems like they know they can't just rely on that forever. So how do they plan to do that? What are the main points of Vision 2030?
One of the biggest is diversifying the economy. They want to build up new industries. Tourism, tech, renewable energy, manufacturing, you name it. The idea is to create this more balanced economy, one that can handle change. They want to tap into the potential of their people, build a private sector that creates jobs and opportunities.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket anymore. Not just oil, a whole range of things.
Yeah.
I like it. But it's not just the economy, right? Vision 2030, it feels like it's about social change, too.
For sure. They get it. You can't have a strong economy without a strong society. So they're pushing for social reforms, more opportunities for women in education, jobs, even in government. It's about making things more equal, a society where everyone can contribute.
That's a good point. We talked about that balance, tradition, and modernization. It feels like Vision 2030 is trying to find a new balance, a way to modernize, but still hold on to their cultural values.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Embracing progress, but doing it in a way that fits with Saudi Arabia's identity. So that means promoting their culture, putting money into arts, entertainment, sports, making a more exciting place to live for everyone.
All right, so we've got diversifying the economy, social reforms, culture. What else makes Vision 2030 different? What sets it apart?
I think it's the sheer scale of it, the ambition. I mean, they're building Neo-M, this futuristic city, from scratch. It's in the Tabuk region, and they're saying it'll be totally powered by renewable energy, all the latest technology, focused on sustainability. They want to show the world, hey, we're leading the way in innovation.
A $500 billion city in the desert from nothing. Now that's ambitious, but okay, let's talk about regular people. How will Vision 2030 affect them, their everyday lives?
Well, the goal is to make life better. Healthcare, education, housing. They want to make it easier to access all that. More efficient government, less bureaucracy, so people can get things done. The idea is to give people more control over their lives so they can contribute to how the country grows.
So it's not just these huge ideas, but real, practical stuff that makes a difference. But let's be honest, no plan is perfect. Are there any problems with Vision 2030? Any criticisms?
Some people, they doubt it can actually be done. I mean, it's so ambitious, especially with the global economy being so uncertain. And some worry about how fast they're pushing social reforms. Will there be pushback from the more conservative people? And then there's the question of, will everyone benefit, or just some?
Yeah, good points. It's one thing to have a plan, another to make it actually work. But Vision 2030, this is a long-term thing, right? It's about direction, where they want to go, not doing everything at once.
Exactly, and it's not set in stone. They're constantly adjusting based on feedback and how things change. It's a process, not just some rigid plan.
So it's a living thing, changing with the times. Makes sense. We've talked about the economy, society. What about the world? How do other countries see this transformation?
Saudi Arabia wants to be a leader in the region, a major player globally. They're using diplomacy, soft power, building alliances. They want to be seen as modern, looking ahead, ready to take on big global issues.
And that desire for more influence, we're seeing it in their foreign policy too. Saudi Arabia is more assertive now, getting involved in conflicts, trying to shape events outside their border.
Oh, definitely. They're not sitting back anymore. They have goals, they're using their power, and they want to have a say in how the region, even the world, develops. Vision 2030, it's a big part of that.
It's really interesting to watch Saudi Arabia right now. So much history, such an important part of the Islamic world, and now this Vision 2030, this bold plan for the future. The story's not finished yet, and who knows how it'll change the kingdom, the region, maybe even the world.
Yeah, it reminds us that things are always changing. Countries change, old alliances fall apart, new ones pop up. And Saudi Arabia, with Vision 2030, they're right in the middle of all that.
We've covered a lot today. Ancient history, Islam, the kingdom, their vision for the future. Our listeners have a lot to think about. Anything else you want to add? Any final thoughts for them?
The main thing to remember is Saudi Arabia is complicated. It's a mix of old and new, tradition and modern ideas. It's a country that never stops changing, and there's a lot more to come.
Well said. I hope this deep dive gave you a better understanding of Saudi Arabia. It's in the news all the time, but like we've seen today, there's so much more to it than meets the eye. Keep learning, keep asking questions. You might be surprised what you find. Thanks for joining us.
وارفع الخفاق أخضر يحمل النور المسطر رددي الله أكبر يا موطني عشت فخر المسلمين عاش الدليل للعلم والوطن سارعي للمجد والعليا مجدي لخالق السماء وارفع الخفاق أخضر يحمل النور المسطر رددي الله أكبر يا موطني عشت فخر المسلمين عاش الدليل للعلم